Good evening, everybody. I hope you are all well, and thank you very much indeed, those of you who have been able to join us this evening for the Teach China Graduate Programme question and answer session. This will go up live on YouTube following the end of the session, so those of you who want to view it afterwards, who want to get a little bit more of an idea, are able to do so. I'd just like to start by introducing myself. My name is Will and I work with Opportunity China. I was also a former teacher in China myself several years ago, going out as part of one of the earliest Teach China graduate programme cohorts. So I'm really happy to speak with those of you who have been able to join today and answer any questions that you might have, however big, however small, on whatever topic you have. Now, you'll notice that there is a chat box available for this. So what I'd like to do is encourage all of you who have any questions to just write them in that chat box. It doesn't matter what order they go in, it doesn't matter when you do it. Don't feel afraid or like you're being rude, just clonk any questions that you have in there as we continue through the stream, and I'll be more than happy to answer absolutely any questions that come up at all. Well, first of all, let me just start by saying congratulations to everyone who has been offered a place on the Teach China graduate programme and has accepted already, and also to those of you who might be joining who have got their offer and are maybe still thinking about it. We'd love to have you, and hopefully this will answer some questions that you might have. So I'd just like to begin, before we get on to the questions, by addressing the elephant in the room just at the moment, which is, of course, the coronavirus. Now, at the moment, I'm sure all of you are watching the news continually. I'm sure some of you who are at university may have had lectures affected. It's very much touched pretty much everyone's life. It's an inescapable fact. For those of you who have been keeping up with the news, again, I'm sure I'm probably just repeating myself. But China is almost certainly, in the world, one of the better places to be at the moment. And it's important that we remain positive with that. With the Teach China graduate programme starting in September and October, 6 months away, we are fully expecting things to be operational. We are fully expecting schools across the country to be open. In the last 2 days, China has only had one new reported case that has come from within China, so that's those that aren't being imported in, and has very much overcome the worst of it. In the last week, China has begun also to open several schools, and we have actually had the first of our originally intended February intake graduate programme participants go out already. So it's really exciting times to see things being back up and running in China at the moment. However, of course, we do operate a standard of total flexibility. So we will be able to extend any dates of starting that you might have. We do really like for participants to go out at the same time, as it does give that real sense of cohesion and can really make a difference. But of course, for those of you who may not be able to go out for whatever reason in September or October, be it that university graduation dates have been put back or whatever extenuating circumstances there are, rest assured that we will be incredibly flexible. We will be able to work with each individual on an individual basis according to their circumstances. And with relation to delayed arrival in China, there will be absolutely no penalisation. There will be no offers that will be withdrawn. And what's important as well is to remember that when you do arrive, a really important aspect will be helping to educate students who had been missing school beforehand. So it's a great opportunity to be able to go ahead and make a real difference in this. So let's address a few of the questions that are just popping in at the moment from Nathan. Hi Nathan, great to hear from you again. It's lovely to meet you up in Sunderland back in November, I think it was. That feels like an absolute lifetime ago. So when can we expect to hear from potential employers? Well, Expecting to hear from potential employers, what we're looking at for that is going to be our school matching process, where we'll send across the options that are going to be available to you based on your preferences, based on your eligibility, and based on any previous experience that you might have. We're going to give you the option to select between them, and of course if you don't like any of the options that are sent across to you, we'll be able to come back with you on that. But each individual has their own file based on the communication that we've had so far, and we'll look to put you in touch with individual schools on that. Now, for when the school matching process will start, we'll usually start this in late March. However, due to the circumstances, we may look to be putting it back until around mid-April. But we can, of course, start before that if you're wanting to really get ahead. Many of the schools are a couple of weeks behind on a lot of their work, so that might put a few things back. So we are in all likelihood going to be looking at around a mid-April start for hearing from the potential employers and getting those Skype interviews set up as part of the school matching process. Garrick, how soon before our intake should we start working on earning a Tefl if we don't have it yet? Again, a really good question there, Garrick. So, Opportunity China work with two Tefl providers, one for those who are going to be doing their Tefl in the United Kingdom and one for those who are going to be doing their Tefl outside of the United Kingdom. We do have a page on our website where you can find that, but we will also be emailing out links and information on starting those as well. A good rule of thumb would usually be starting it around 3 months before you head out, as that gives you plenty of time to complete it part-time, especially if you are studying. However, if you do want to do it a little bit later, the general experience has been that people can complete this Tefl qualification in anywhere between a week to 4 weeks when putting their mind to it. Do bear in mind that some of you will need to have your Tefl qualification notarized, and some may have to have it fully authenticated, which will also add time. But if I were to give an answer of when you absolutely should have it, you absolutely should have your Tefl certificate in its physical form delivered to you and completed by the time you receive your degree certificate. So you can have that, your Tefl certificate, your degree certificate, and your criminal record check all fully notarized at the same time as each other. So the deadline, we will be sending out a full list of deadlines, but the main deadline that you'll want to have it will be the date that you have your degree certificate in your hand. Michael, when do I need to make my final decision about my location? Really good question there, Michael. So in terms of making a final decision about your location, if you have any questions whatsoever in the intermediate period between now and mid-April, when we're expecting the school matching process to begin, do please send them across to us. In addition to that, if you have any questions or want to talk with us in person to discuss any options with relation to your preferred location, please do feel free to drop us an email and we can set up a conversation regarding that as well. It would be good if you were able to have an idea of where you want to go by mid-March, by late March, so towards the end of this month. However, we would advise that you have a good think and you also ask any questions that you might have if there's anything that you're unsure of with regards to a location or whether a certain place would be right for you. Lydia, how long will applications be open for the September intake? And really good question there, Lydia. So our application deadline date currently is the 30th of May. Now we are conscious that the circumstances at the moment mean that we may not have been able to have brought this opportunity to as many people as we would have liked through our outreach. So we may look to extend that deadline in the near future. However, if you were to submit an application and you were to be accepted, we are at the moment indefinitely suspending deadlines on those who have already had offers made for them. So if you have an offer, that offer will stand so far, will stand at the moment indefinitely. Until the situation becomes clearer on the coronavirus at the moment in the West. Garrick, when will the school matching process occur? Great question again, Garrick. So going back to my answer to Nathan, we're going to be looking at the school matching process likely starting around mid-April. As I mentioned earlier, we often do start the process around March, and you may have seen in some material that that would be the case. We will likely be starting around mid-April for this year. Matthew, are other cities available other than the ones listed on the catalogue? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. So we do work with a number of other cities in addition to the ones that have been listed on there. For instance, to give you just a couple of examples, we do work with organisations in Chengdu, as well as in Guangzhou. There are also opportunities at schools, both public and international, across the country. They are a little less in Chengdu, Guangzhou, and also the Jiangsu city of Zhangjiagang, which is a slightly smaller city but a beautiful and well-developed city, the greenest city in China. These are where the majority and most roles are available. There are roles available otherwise in many different areas across China with the organisations that we work with as well. But the ones that are in the catalogue, as well as Chengdu, Guangzhou and Zhangjiagang, are the ones where the majority of positions are, and the ones where the majority of those who are going to be out as part of the Teach China graduate programme will be going to. Elena, will coronavirus affect the Teach China graduate programme? Thus far, we have had an effect in that we have, as I mentioned earlier, suspended the deadlines for acceptances for those who have got a place on the Teach China graduate programme thus far indefinitely. We do usually tend to make sure that those deadlines are kept to. Again, there is no one with a gun to your head, and if the situation does change, we will be looking to extend and be flexible with relation to the graduate programme on it. But I must stress as well that in China, the suppression of the virus has been successful. People are going back to school and life is returning to normal. The next one, how specific can I be with my location? My partner lives by the capital airport in Beijing. We hope to find a school that allows us to live together and commute to work without issue. Nathan, with regards to location, within specific regions, the partners that we work with often have schools and centres that are located all around the city. So it's important that you just ensure that you notify us about those specific locations so that we can speak with our partners directly and ensure that there is a position that's going to be either in the district that you're looking for or very close to that district. If your partner is near the airport, I'm guessing that's going to be Daxing district in Beijing. What we would do is take that information to our partners and make sure that you would be interviewing for and working within a school that would be as close as possible. But again, making sure that you give us all of that information beforehand so we can contact with them gives us the best chance for that. Pfizer, hello, my university has postponed my graduation ceremony. Will that affect my position in the programme? Really good question there. So again, we are very conscious about the fact that there are going to be several locations we are very conscious about the fact that there are going to be several universities who may well postpone graduation ceremonies. and may postpone degree certificates being handed out. Now, in order to attain a work permit and the legal Z working visa to work in China, you will need to have several documents fully authenticated. These will include your degree certificate, so you will need to have your degree certificate before you go to China in order to get that. Again, as I mentioned, Opportunity China are being very flexible in terms of start dates. So if you were unable to start in September, October time, that's absolutely fine. If there's postponement to your graduation ceremony and a postponement to your degree certificate being handed out, the situation is ready to be quite fluid, and so are we in terms of start dates that are going to be there. Shannon, given that it's a requirement to have a medical checkup, will the checkups be more rigorous in light of the coronavirus? Really good question there, Shannon. Thus far, with the experience of those who we've had who have gone out to China, the checks that have been done that I know of do still do the same things, and the checks are quite in depth as well. So as part of the checks, you'll have X-rays, you'll have an ultrasound done, you will have blood work done as well. But again, that's nothing to be scared of when you arrive. They, at the moment in China, airports and in areas, they are checking people's temperatures. And at the moment, they are still operating a quarantine for those who are arriving in China. However, by September, October time, that may very well no longer be the case. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the situation is fluid. We shouldn't think that there would be anything more rigorous than the current check that is done in China in terms of a health check, as it is very thorough. But we will be updating our health check information that, again, you can find in the website, and we will be sending out to you beforehand. Okay. Charlie, going back to Tefl, you said 3 months before you go out. Did you mean to have said no, Charlie, sorry. I mean to have started it, to have started it at least 3 months before you go out, but to have that certificate in your hand by the time you receive your degree certificate. So I understand some people may be graduating as late as sort of October, or some may be graduating as early as July. Just as long as you have it in your hand by then that's absolutely fine. But what I'd recommend doing is giving yourself 3 months to complete it if you're still taking your studies, so you can take it a little bit easier and use all the time that you have. It's always a good idea to get started as soon as possible and do it little by little. But like I say, if you want to dedicate a week or 2 weeks to really bashing through that, then you can absolutely feel free to do that, but really do have it in your hand by the time you receive your degree certificate. I applied for the graduate program in Korea, not China, and I received an offer for China instead. Is there a reason why? The email said due to unforeseen external circumstances. Yes, that's right. So this year, Opportunity China did launch an Opportunity Global program as well. However, due to the circumstances and partners in many of the countries, as this would be the first time we were running it as a global program as opposed to just a China program, many of the partners that we have had in there have had less demand and also less security in terms of knowing where people will be going and when they'll be able to go. We've decided this year, given the current situation in China being more stable and given our experience working with China each year, that we are going to just be working in China. Again, this is because there are many more limited spaces, and also working with many of these organisations in new countries for the first time. In the current climate with situations like this, we would rather be safe than sorry. Luke, I'm not interested in working with children. I'm hoping to work in a high school. Is that possible with minimal experience? So it's a little more difficult. There are some limited high school positions. High school positions do generally go to those who have a little more experience and also those who are a little older. It can be seen as being a little unusual for a teacher who's only 4 or 5 or 6 years older than the oldest students who they're teaching to be there in person. For those of you who are a little bit older than that, it's a little bit more likely, but it is slightly harder. We do work with organisations and institutions that do have positions that are open for high school age students, but there are fewer than that. Middle school students, there are many more positions so far as that's concerned, and those ages do go up to 16, which makes it a little bit better for those who aren't interested in working with the very, very young children. But as I say, there are some high school positions, but for those who don't have a lot of experience, and also for those who aren't 25 and upwards, it is usually harder to secure a role such as that. If coronavirus does flare up again and we are working in China, what is the procedure? Quarantine in China or evacuation? No need to apologise whatsoever for any questions related to coronavirus. We're entirely prepared for that. It entirely depends on the advice that is given from the Foreign Commonwealth Office, as well as the advice that is received from central government in China. With relation to that, it will depend on the gravity of the situation. We are going to have a very long run into this before September and October time. So in all likelihood, we are not going to be necessarily looking at a flare-up, but say a flare-up of any kind of disease or any situation like that. What we do is we work with ensuring we have the best advice coming from the Foreign Commonwealth Office, as well as the Chinese State Department of Health and the Chinese State Department of Culture and Tourism. We also ensure that all of the schools and organisations that we work with, as we did in February, have contingencies in place to help provide teachers with support if they are going to be staying in quarantine. So many of our graduate programme partner schools provided teachers with masks as well as food, and also checking up on them during times in which they were in quarantine. And also they will advise and assist teachers in leaving the country when they go. Opportunity China do not work with any schools or organisations in Wuhan or Hubei, so we didn't have any situations in which emergency evacuations were required at this time, but all of our schools have contingency plans in place to ensure teachers are either supported or directly helped out of the country in the event of any emergency whatsoever. Lydia, are any fees associated with participating in this programme? No, Lydia, there are no fees that are payable whatsoever for the programme in itself. In terms of outlays that you may need to make, there will be the cost of visa, there will be the cost of authentication of documents, and there may be the cost of the Tefl qualification. Now, many of Opportunity China's Teach China Graduate, or several of Opportunity China's Teach China Graduate Programme partners do offer full reimbursements for 1, 2 or all of these outlays, and all of the Teach China Graduate Programme partners offer full reimbursements for flights. Now, if it is a stickling point for you financially that you only want to work with an organisation that will offer full reimbursements for them, we'll be able to send over those options, but they may be a little more limited. Our graduate programme partners do differ slightly in terms of the benefits that they will give. So some will pay more, but others will reimburse more. So when looking at things like reimbursements, it's important to consider your priorities. And again, just let us know what they are. Amanda, hello, regarding health checks, are they all done in China, or will we get a health check done in our home countries beforehand? So Amanda, with relation to the health checks, it depends on the province and sometimes the city institution as to what you will need to get done before you go to China. There are some of our graduate program partners who will accept what is essentially a statement from you that you are in good health. There'll just be a form that'll be sent over to you that you'll need to sign. It's almost like a kind of affidavit, and you'll just need to sign that and send that back to them. Some of you will be required to complete as best as you can the health check for foreigners form. Now, on this form, it will ask about having things like ECC checks, blood tests, x-rays. You don't need to do these. In China, it does work a little bit different. When we see a form in Britain, we'll look at that form like a medical form and think, oh, we have to complete everything. For China, if you are required to fill out that form, you just need to fill out as much as possible. If you make an appointment with a GP and ask them to fill out as much of that as they can, you will be able to get that done for free. There are no schools that we work with that require you to have that entire medical form completed in its entirety, which would require you to pay to have certain tests done. But if you did want to get those tests done before you went to China, if you wanted to check for yourself before you went there, you could do that as well. There are multiple clinics that are available who actually specialize in the China health check, and are able to do that all for you and tick all of those boxes for you as well. But if you do need to get it done, you just need to get it done as much as possible, as much as you can. Your doctor can write NA next to the things that haven't been done, and it just needs to receive a signature and a stamp from them. Once you are in China, you will have a comprehensive health check done, as I mentioned earlier. This will include things such as blood tests, as well as ultrasound and x-rays too. But this will be done after arrival in China. Nathan, in the welcome pack, it states some schools will pay for Tefl as part of the package offered. Given that recruitment may be delayed, how common is this, and is it worth waiting for? With the recruitment being delayed, this shouldn't have an effect on the reimbursements once you arrive in China, Nathan. Like I mentioned, with the schools that will reimburse things such as the visa, the authentication, and or the Tefl, we will send information in the school information sheets to you on what is reimbursed, how much it is reimbursed for, and also the time frame in which it is reimbursed in, whether it's, say, a month or 3 months, which will give you the opportunity to look over and make a decision on that. With relation to delayed recruitment, once you arrive in China, I shouldn't see any reason why any of the schools would not reimburse that as part of the package. Do I need to apply for a basic DBS or an advanced one? You just need to apply for a basic DBS. Again, this year that hasn't changed. It's been the case for a little while now. You only need to apply for a basic DBS check. You can do that yourself. In terms of having a DBS check, those of you who might have a full disclosure or an advanced disclosure that you've received from a previous place of work, they can be accepted, but they can only be accepted if they are if they are within a 3-month time frame date of when they are going to be looked at in China. So we would really recommend, even if you already have an advanced disclosure or a DBS, basic DBS check, I would really recommend that you apply for a new one before you go out, as opposed to relying on that. Nathan, how do we go about insuring ourselves for healthcare? I've been to a hospital in China, and the constant charges are mortifying. Great question again, Nathan. So all Opportunity China, Teach China graduate program partner schools offer full local and health insurance to all of their employees. So that essentially means that you will be insured in the city in which you work, and some of you will be insured in the province in which you work. However, if you are going to be travelling to other provinces or other parts of Asia, we would recommend that you take out travel insurance. We work with Ensley Insurance in the UK, who are able to provide insurance for the teachers who are going out. We will keep everyone notified with information with regards to insurance. When situations change at the moment, given current Foreign Commonwealth Office advice, we will let everyone know when would be the best time to take out insurance, and we'll let everyone know about the discounted Ensley travel insurance that we are able to offer out to everyone at an appropriate time for that before you leave as well. But in terms of local insurance, if anything were to happen to you, you will be covered by your school for that. Supposing we save some money over the course of the year, how might we bring that back over to the UK? Really good question again there, Matthew. So there are a number of applications that you are able to use. You will be able to use an application such as TransferWise. If you go online, if you search for TransferWise, you're able to use that in order to send money from China to the UK. However, there can be some hefty fees associated with it. From a foreigner's bank account in China, you won't be able to do a simple bank transfer. And what I would recommend actually above using a service like TransferWise would be talking to the HR department of your school or a Chinese friend once you're there and asking them to take the money and transfer it to your bank account straight from their bank account in China. So I actually did this myself whilst I was in China before I left. My teaching assistant and I just popped around to the bank. I gave her the cash. She gave it to the cashier, put it straight into her bank and transferred it straight into my bank account, and I ended up saving a lot of money on fees. So my biggest recommendation would be to speak with the school's HR departments. They will have done it a million times before, and ask if they'll be able to help you in transferring that money out. Or speak with a Chinese trusted friend that you've had once you're there as well in order to do it. Otherwise, you can use applications like TransferWise to do that. What should we do in terms of travel/health insurance? Do you recommend again private health insurance is provided as part of the programme? Again, really good question, Amanda. So as I mentioned just earlier, local health insurance whilst you are there will be provided. So they are very often on a city or provincial wide level. If you want to travel Asia, or if you want to travel the rest of China, we do recommend taking out travel insurance. As I mentioned, we work with Ensley to provide a very good discounted group rate for those who are looking to take that out, and we will be sending out information to that with information on travel insurance prior to departure. Matthew, I've already bought a Tefl program online through Groupon. I've just started doing that. I assume the program is universal and thus this is okay/is credible. This can lead into a little bit of a grey area, Matthew. Although there is no universal accreditation body for Tefl qualifications, when it comes to having them certified, it does usually help if they are associated with a certification body of some sort. It doesn't, when I say there's no accreditation body for Tefl qualifications, I mean exactly for Tefl qualifications. There are some courses that people have sometimes gotten on Groupons that can be a little bit problematic when they have taken them to certain solicitors or notary publics to be notarized. However, broadly speaking, it's quite rare for that to happen. That is the reason why we do tend to recommend the Tefl qualifications that we have and send out, as they have no problem whatsoever being recognised and notarised. Might be a good idea, Matthew, if you email it across to me, and what I can do is have a look, or even possibly pop it across to a notary service just to double check with them if they would be able to notarise that. and if that would be okay. But more often than not, Matthew, a lot of Tefl qualifications tend to be all right. But there has been an instance where a couple of people have been stung by that in the past, a couple of years ago. Nathan, how much would you recommend saving up before departure, especially for Beijing? Good question, Nathan. So it really depends on the sort of lifestyle that you are planning to lead for your first month before you are paid. There are some people who will save up as much as about £2,000 before they head out. Although, frankly, I absolutely don't know anyone who's ever quite needed that money before they've gone. And there are some who save up significantly less than that. We do tend to recommend taking with you in cash between £500 and £1,000. The partner schools that we work with will offer startup loans as well for helping those who are arriving, especially with relation to getting their first 3 months rent down for deposits on apartments. Those startup loans can be paid back usually quite flexibly to the school directly. So those who are going out that feel they don't quite have adequate savings, don't necessarily worry. Those startup loans are available to help you pay for your apartment, also pay for things going in there. But we really do recommend saving up as much as you possibly can before you go out. Like we say, most people tend to save up usually around £1,000 before they go. Sometimes people take less than that and take up loans. What are the average costs of living on a day-to-day basis? A really good question again there, Shannon. It very much depends on where you're going to be based. So if you're going to be living in a first-tier city, now many of you might have apartments provided for you directly by the school, but some will have rent that'll come in the form of an accommodation allowance from the school. So let's take that out of the equation for the moment. And let's just talk about day-to-day living in terms of things such as food, transportation, and leisure. So in terms of food in China, this is one of the best things. It's pretty much universal. If you're wanting to go to a Chinese restaurant, if you're wanting to go to a local traditional Chinese restaurant, there might be a little bit of variation between sort of first and second tier cities. But if you wanted to go out for a nice meal in China with 7 or 8 of your friends and colleagues, as the majority of meals, as you will soon experience, will be in China, you'd be looking at spending about sort of £3 a head in all likelihood in a city like Chengdu. You may be looking at spending a little more than that in a city like Beijing, about £5 a head in a traditional Chinese restaurant for a nice big meal that you're all going to eat together. If you are looking at going to a Western restaurant, there are also a lot of options that are going to be available, even in second-tier cities. Quite often these restaurants will be run by expats themselves. They do tend to import ingredients, so they are a little more expensive as China has heavier tariffs. If you're looking at going to, say, an equivalent of somewhere like TGI Fridays or Frankie and Benny's and somewhere like that in China, but they don't have those chains, but say an independent restaurant that was similar to that, you would usually look at paying about the same price that you would in the UK for a meal. Now, that doesn't sound too bad from this side, but when you compare it with the cost of going out for a Chinese meal, you'll very quickly realise how much cheaper it is to eat Chinese food in China. In terms of chain restaurants, of Western chain restaurants, places like KFC and places like McDonald's, you're usually looking at a price that's ever so slightly cheaper than in the UK, but around the same amount. When I was last out in October, I would say McDonald's was about £1 or £2 less for, say, sort of like a big quarter pounder with cheese meal than in the UK. With with leisure expenses, again, it depends entirely on what you want to do. For things like local theme parks and local attractions like that, you'll very quickly find how much cheaper things are in China for that, even in the larger cities. For instance, in Guangzhou, their most popular theme park, you can get an all-day ticket to go on all the rides, to go to the circus at the end for less than £10. There's really good options in most cities for public parks and attractions. Public parks usually have a very small entrance fee outside of evening hours, which is usually about 1 to 5 kwai, so about 10 to 50 pence. In terms of gym memberships and things such as that, it would depend on where you want to go. If you're going to a very sort of high-end gym, you can expect to pay anything up to around £30 a month. If you are going to a sort of bog standard gym, you look at sort of £10 to £15, if not less than that in certain areas as well. In terms of the cost of transportation and travelling, again, like food, this is where things are much, much cheaper in terms of day-to-day life. Travelling, you will be paying as little as 2 kwai, or about a little over 20p for a tube journey. In a lot of major cities, it goes anywhere from 2 kwai to about 10 kwai if you're going really far outside the city on a really big journey. But that 10 kwai would essentially be like travelling to several different counties, and in the UK, paying probably about 40 quid for a ticket that you'd be paying a little over £1 for. So transportation is very reasonable and quite cheap in China. So in terms of day-to-day living, you're going to be looking in terms of overheads and expenditure depending on what your lifestyle is. Of course, going out in the evening as well if you want to go to a bar, beers in your standard sort of Carling beers and things like that, and Qingdao beers and a lot of bars can work out as low as about 10 kwai if you are not going to the very fancy special places downtown and going to the regular expat haunts. So again, it's a lot cheaper. But you can look at saving in terms of a cost-to-cost basis of what you would in the UK, likely anywhere between 50 to 80% of what you would spend doing the same thing in the United Kingdom, depending on where you're going to be based. A small exception to all of this would be Shanghai, where things are more expensive. They're a lot closer in terms of day-to-day living than somewhere like the UK, with the exception of going out to eat in Chinese food and also with the exception of transport. But amenities and leisure and things like that are usually a little bit more expensive in Shanghai due to the upscale market. But again, that's if you're living in downtown Shanghai. If you're living in one of the districts a little bit further out, might be a bit cheaper. But you can expect to save anything from 50 to 80%. 50% if you're in a second tier city, you don't even need to try. But if you want to save a little bit of money, you can save anywhere between 50 to 80% in terms of day-to-day overheads of living and what we usually have. Jonathan, would you recommend starting to buy a Tefl program prior to departure? Yes, so you will need to complete your Tefl program before you do your visa process. So as we say, I would recommend having your Tefl buying your Tefl at least 3 months before you get your degree certificate. So try to complete your degree certificate. So once you have your degree certificate after graduation, or if you're receiving it before graduation, if you find what that date is going to be, and then go back 3 months from that, and that is the date in which you will be wanting to have bought and started your Tefl qualification. But you can do it from any point. There are many people who have already bought their Tefl courses and are already starting to do them. You can have as long a run into it as you like. Ethan, what if you do not like the job, the employer, are the contract fees for quitting would this cancel your visa? Would there be time to gain employment at another school before that? Okay, good question, Nathan. We have a very low dropout rate of those who go out to China. So last year's program, so those who went out in February of 2019, and also in August, those who went out the year before last, of course, before the coronavirus, we had only 3 people out of hundreds actually drop out themselves, and they did just leave. So within contracts, there may be clauses offering dates in which you can stay from, but those who wanted to leave negotiated it calmly with their employers. I would always say just negotiate, speak with it calmly, levelly, respectfully to the employer if you are wanting to leave your job and come back to your home country. We have not had any participants on the graduate programme who have been financially penalised and had to pay a fee for that. Would this cancel your visa? In many cases, yes, it would. It can be quite complicated to have a visa transferred, especially to another school. And as you've signed a contract with a particular school, dedicating yourself to that particular school for a year, if you want to leave and have them voluntarily transfer that visa over at time and expense to them, it can be quite hard for them to be able to do that for you. So if you wanted, all those who do tend to leave China will just leave, go back to their home country and stay there because the reason is sometimes China isn't for them. But those who tend to find themselves in trouble might be those who go out to a bar at night and they meet a Chinese guy who owns a school, in inverted commas, and is willing to offer you way more money than the school that you're working in at the moment. A lot of teachers will go to their school and say, I want to quit now because I can get more money from this school. Then the visa things don't work out. The person will try to get people over on an L visa or a tourist visa illegally, and all sorts of problems can happen. A lot of nightmare stories that you tend to read in ESL forums often come from teachers who might have their head turned by someone who says they can offer them the world. All they need to do is break their contract with their current school, but breaking their contract with their current school means they can't get a proper visa transferred over, and also the new school doesn't even know how to arrange and organise for a visa to be there. So we would generally recommend, if you have any issues with them, first of all going into mediation. Again, Opportunity China as an organisation are a bridge between you and the schools, so anything that you need help with, any support, any negotiation whatsoever, if any problems do arise, they very rarely do, but if they do arise, do come to us. We've been able to ensure that issues have been resolved over the years in the small and rare numbers of times that they do happen with any of our partner schools. Lydia, and if it's not too much of a bother, it's certainly not, can you please talk about what the apartment hunting process looks like, what things should be keeping in mind or look out for? Good question, Lydia. So the apartment hunting process depends really on what type of school or institution you go to and choose to want to go to. So we work with a number of graduate programme partners who provide accommodation outright. In that case, you won't go apartment hunting, you will move straight in. Very often it will be an apartment that will be shared with 1 or 2 teachers of the same sex. All of these apartments are very modern. As part of our due diligence process, we receive pictures and inspect teaching accommodation that is provided outright by our partners. Always very modern, always close to the school that you're going to be working in, and always have a good community of other expats who are either living with you or are living nearby. If you receive an accommodation allowance, which will be supplemental to your income, you will initially be put up upon arrival in a hotel that will be provided for you by the partner school and by your employer in China. You'll go out with the HR team from that school, usually look at 2 or 3 different apartments in locations that are close to where you're wanting to go to. it's important that you speak with them and make sure before you leave they're aware of what kind of thing you're looking for, or you speak with us and let us know what kind of thing you're looking for, any big do's and don'ts with it, so that we can express this so they can best set up viewings of apartments that are going to be adequate. Now, when you are viewing apartments, it's again important just to make sure that the apartment is going to be right for you, and also have a realistic expectation of where you're going to be and the type of and the cost of rent where you're going to be with relation to the accommodation allowance that you'll receive in addition to your salary. Now, if you're going to be in a city like Shenzhen, where rents are a lot higher and ground room is a lot less, you're much more likely to have a studio apartment or share an apartment with someone else. If you're going to be in Chengdu or somewhere like Fuzhou, where the ground rent is significantly less, you can expect to get a lot more for your money. So it doesn't necessarily always mean, that just because someone else who's in a different location has a bigger apartment to you, that you're being screwed out of anything. It's being aware of where you are and the cost of living in the places that you're at the moment as well. Garrick, in terms of bringing cash, should it be hard or accessible through a credit debit card? How easy is it to transfer American dollars to yuan in China? Good question again there, Garrick. So what we recommend doing is still treating cash as king when it comes to taking money to China. I really, really recommend when you first go out, taking money out in cash, taking your dollars, and then exchanging them at a bureau de change in the US, or if you're in the UK, taking your pounds out and exchanging them for renminbi in the UK. Make sure that you are carrying less than 20,000 Chinese renminbi, as that's the maximum amount that they'll allow you to take out. I can't imagine anyone here will want to be taking out more than 20,000 renminbi, as that is quite a lot and significantly more than what we would recommend you to take out as a starting basis. But I would recommend taking out cash, having a safe location for you to keep that in and store that in. And when you arrive in China, what you'll be able to do once you have your Chinese bank account set up is you'll be able to, when you do that, hand over your cash and have that put straight into your Chinese bank account. So you'll be able to use all of the things like WeChat Pay, Alipay, all of the mobile payment services that once you arrive in China, you will very quickly see are used in abundance. Amanda, do we have to stay in the same apartment for the whole year, or could we potentially change accommodation after we've lived there a couple of months? With relation to apartments, it's worth speaking with your employer school as to how long the lease is going to be on the apartments themselves. When you pay your first rent payment, it'll be a 3-month rent payment that'll be down paid, but it's worth speaking with them individually. Sometimes there are 6-month rent agreements and sometimes there are 12-month rent agreements. If there are any serious issues that you have with the apartment, then bring that up with your employer school, and also if you want to ensure that you bring it up with Opportunity China as well, and again we'll be able to help and mediate with any of those issues that you might possibly have. Also, do we have a choice in type of apartment, i.e. size, living alone or with other people? Again, this entirely depends on what type of school or institution you're going to. If you have your accommodation provided by the school, then you will move into an apartment, again, with teachers who will be of the same sex or gender, or you'll move into a studio apartment as well. Again, it's worth specifying any preferences that you have beforehand so we can make sure that this is communicated to the school before you go. In terms of moving around within that structure, if the accommodation is provided, if there's any issues that you might have, if there have been very rare instances where there have been personality clashes, for example, within apartments, again, speaking with the partner school and the HR team there and with your colleagues and ensuring that things can be amicably moved around is advisable. If you receive an accommodation allowance, again, what that means, as I mentioned earlier, is you will get to choose which apartment you want to live in after being taken around a few times. And you will be able to and you'll be able to choose on the basis of that. If you want to live with other people, you can do that once you arrive. If you're arriving with other people, you can speak together and say, we want to live together. Can we look at apartments for 2 or 3 people? Many of those have done that, who have met at the Opportunity China pre-departure sessions in London and decided they want to live together because they realise they're going to the same school at the same time as each other. If you want to live on your own, again, if that's in a studio apartment or sort of a 1-bed apartment, just make sure that's specified before you go if you're receiving an accommodation allowance. Nathan, what advice can you give for the interview process? Great question, Nathan. So, for the interview process, what they are really looking for are people who are incredibly engaging, people who are able to hold their attention. Chinese tend not to like a huge amount of sort of intellectual waffle or academic waffle. It very often goes over people's heads, especially if it's in a second language. And China can be quite direct when it comes to things such as interviews, so expect to receive some quite direct questions. We really recommend having anecdotes and stories to tell to back up experiences that you might have had. If there's anything that any funny stories that are related to difficult problems that you've needed to solve, any anecdotes that you have that are related to education or children in any way, be that cousins, nieces, nephews, younger brothers or sisters, have those ready and prepared to be able to flex around into any answers that you want to give for your questions. Do we pay for accommodation out of our wages, or is there a set subsidy given by a school to cover the cost of rent? Sure, again, as I mentioned earlier, it depends entirely on the type of school you're going to. If you're going to a school that pays for your apartment outright, then that's that. They pay for your apartment outright. You never pay any rent. You don't receive an accommodation allowance. The rent is just paid for. If you receive an accommodation allowance, then you will not pay money out of your salary. You'll pay money out of your accommodation allowance. So you'll receive 2 distinct payments each month. One will be your salary and one will be your accommodation allowance. And your school can help you pay for your rent directly from your accommodation allowance. Matthew, can we see the apartments that may be provided by schools before we commit to them? Yep. So again, just request pictures of the accommodation. Opportunity China, we have pictures of accommodation and apartments that are done by the schools as well. Again, it's a very common question that's asked of employers before they arrive to see what the apartments and accommodation will look like before they get there. Do simply ask the employers. If you receive an accommodation allowance, of course, you will view the apartments before you make any decision on moving in or not. Shannon, does Opportunity China provide Mandarin lessons, and if so, when do we start? So pre-departure, Opportunity China will be providing Mandarin lessons. We'll be providing online webinar Mandarin lessons. These will take place in June this year, and we will be sending out more information on that. Once you are in China, many of our graduate program partners do provide free Mandarin lessons as part of the package that they offer to those who are coming there. And again, during the school matching process, we will include this information on the schools that we send out to you. All of the Teach China graduate program partner schools will be able to help you through their HR departments get cheap and independent or group Chinese classes outside of that, and we'll be able to offer recommendations of teachers for that as well. But many of them do provide free lessons whilst you are there, and we will send you information on that in the school information sheets for the schools that will be providing that. Matthew, I study Chinese at university and in between level 4 and 5 HSK. Very good, well done, Matthew. Are Chinese lessons available at higher level, or is it just for beginners? With the lessons that are provided by the schools we work with as part of the Teach China graduate program, they are very often for beginners. I'm going to be honest with you, Matthew. As they tend to be in a class format, but they will be able to help you get yourself sorted out with a private tutor for doing those higher levels. When I went out to China, the initial lessons that I had were very helpful for me at the stage in which I was going in, as it was very useful while I didn't have a very large vocabulary. But later on, I asked my school to help me get myself set up with a private tutor as things got a little more complex and I needed a little better understanding for that. Nathan, would I be eligible for an apartment allowance with the apartments in my partner's name, not mine? She and I would like to have our home ready before departure. So I do remember speaking with you, Nathan. Your partner is Chinese. So do write in to correct me if I am wrong at all with anything to do with that. So the organisations will work, will often work with you directly as an individual when signing the lease. We've not had a situation where we've had anyone asked to do this yet, to be completely honest with you. So it would be worth speaking with your employer school once you've been offered a contract and decided on whether or not you want to work there. It might be a question to ask them. My hunch would be that it wouldn't be able to be done, as it wouldn't be your signature on the name or on the lease, and there are special requirements for foreigners in terms of household registration whilst you are in China. So I would think that in all likelihood you wouldn't be able to rent and move in until you had got there. Using your school allowance. Very often the schools won't be able to offer an allowance to a Chinese citizen on your behalf, as there's a lot of legal ramifications and other things that go alongside that. So I would think it would be unlikely, Nathan, but I'm not too sure. Shannon, how often do you think we'll be able to travel home for holidays and such? So again, this depends very much on the type of school in which you will be working. So if you are going to be working in a public school, you will have longer public school holidays where you will have a couple of weeks of holiday, say in Spring Festival. And several weeks, of course, over the summer, where you can look to return if you want to, or as many of our Teach China Graduate Programme participants do, and as is much more popular for Teach China Graduate Programme participants, can go and travel the rest of Asia and travel all of those countries that are on your doorstep as well. In terms of returning home, those who work in public schools will often return home during the summer break that they have, and some may even return home for a short time during the winter-spring festival break that they get as well. If you are in a private school or private language centre, the dates that you can take off are discretionary. Within the school holidays, of course, you're usually going to be a lot busier. But if you want to take out a big block and head home working in a private language centre, you certainly can. But many of those who tend to work in a private language centre will more often than not take out shorter breaks and go travelling as part of that, and at the end of their contract return home or go travelling. Nathan, if there are restrictions on renting an apartment for foreigners, would there be restrictions on me and my partner living together due to contract shenanigans? She is Chinese, you remember correctly. Good, I'm glad. No, there wouldn't. I wouldn't see there being any issue on the two of you living together. What I would see there potentially being an issue on would be her going in lieu of you and signing a contract for that. again, it's just worth speaking with your school and making sure that they are aware of the situation before you go out. The only issues that I can see with that as being a bit of a likelihood of it being a negative would be the actual selection of the apartment and the money transfer that's being used to pay for that coming from the school as each month for it, as the school will help you with your personal registration on there. Your partner will be able to do everything herself independently. Zoe, is it okay for your partners to come across and visit, and how long would they be allowed to stay? Good question, Zoe. So a standard L visa, which is a tourist or visitor visa to come to China, will be for 3 months. So they absolutely can come over and visit you. And all you'll need to do, really simple, is just send them a letter of invitation and a photocopy of your passport and your residence permit once you have it, and they'll be able to apply for an L visa and come over and visit you for anything up to 3 months at a time. I don't know anyone who has done it for quite that long, but very often people tend to come and visit for, say, a week or 2 weeks. That's absolutely fine. That's no problem whatsoever. Do make sure that if they are not staying in a hotel, you ask your school if they can help you just register that they'll be staying, say, at your apartment when they arrive in China with the local offices as well, just in case. Matthew, if we decide we want to travel to another country in Asia during the holiday, is it best to buy flight tickets / accommodation through a Chinese website, especially if you have to pay with Chinese bank card? That's a really good question, Matthew. To be honest, my opinion is yes. My opinion is it's always best to book through Ctrip because it usually is a heck of a lot cheaper than using most British apps, even things like Kayak for flights and things like Booking.com. I would recommend using a Chinese app for that. Again, like you say, it is connected to your bank card as well. There are some people who pay using their card back home for it. But yeah, I would recommend paying for things like flights and hotels abroad for sake of ease, with it being connected to your Chinese bank card using a website such as Ctrip. But also, to be completely honest with you, due to price, generally actually works out a lot cheaper. Okay, great. Well, in terms of the school matching process, I just want to very quickly touch on this. As I mentioned earlier, during the questions that I answered earlier, the school matching process will be pushed back a little bit. We are expecting schools to resume en masse around early April to mid-April. So we are expecting the majority of schools to begin that school matching process around that time. However, we will keep you continuously updated with information on anything that might change with that. In terms of the process, you will be presented with a range of school options, and we will present this to you in the form of school information and school matching forms. These forms will include information on the school you'll be going, the location where it is, the salary range that you can be expected to receive, as well as the accommodation allowance, any reimbursements that you get, and lots of pictures of loads and loads of different, of loads and loads of happy children, and pictures of the schools, as well as pictures of accommodation that they've had before as well. You'll get to select which of the schools you wish to interview with. We'll set up an interview between yourself and the HR department, or the head teacher or foreign teachers manager of that school. We will send you a full brief of what to expect as part of the school interview, and we'll also schedule a call during the process to answer any questions that you might have and to help you best prep for your interview as well before you do that. I'm just going to share with everyone in the chat, if you have not already received it, the Opportunity China training overview. as well. This will include information on our pre-departure training, which might be useful for you to have a little bit of a look through if you get the opportunity to do that. Nathan, I shaved my head recently. My partner says I look like a monk. I know this might sound silly, but is there a stigma against baldness in China? Do I need to wear a hat for my interview? No, don't worry. Baldness is a blight on as many, if not more, Chinese people than it is on British people. There's no stigma associated to it whatsoever. Certainly, well, no stigma that's not associated to it in the West. There may be some Chinese people who might say, that foreigner's bald. But that would just be a difference of saying, that foreigner has blonde hair or that foreigner has big blue eyes. But very much just a statement of intent. There's nothing offensive about being bald in China. You don't need to worry about offending any monks. I have a lot of bald friends who live in China, so don't worry at all about that. No, I'd recommend not wearing a hat to your interview with that, but wearing smart with a nice shirt and tie and having your bald head on display will be absolutely fine, Nathan. And Shannon, what sort of taboos are there in China that we wouldn't consider to be taboos in the West? Very good question there, Shannon. Very good question indeed. So there's all kinds of sort of little things. For instance, when it comes to things like gift giving, there are certain things that are considered to be quite bad luck. So usually I'd recommend against giving people things like watches or clocks as gifts. This is usually very bad luck, as it's an indication that the time that you will be together will be gone soon. Also, giving people or handing people things like umbrellas can be culturally awkward at times as well. And certainly never give anyone a green hat, or in best cases, generally don't give someone green items of clothing, as culturally that can be really quite taboo. There are things such as dining etiquette, not putting your chopsticks upright in your rice after you finish. That's considered to be quite rude. Things like tapping your chopsticks on your bowl if you get rice stuck on it. That's something I'm incredibly guilty of, that I know can sometimes really irk those Chinese diners who are around me when I'm doing that. It can be sometimes quite taboo, and we will go into real detail in this in our pre-departure webinars. There can be certain taboos that you won't even realise necessarily are taboos. There are some things that will be asked very straightforward in China, but there are also some things that will be done in a very roundabout way. Again, there's a bit of a north-south divide on this in China, but quite often Chinese don't like to reject outright or receive rejection, and very often there can be quite long and winding explanations to things. There can be quite long and winding explanations to things that can be a little bit problematic along the way. And it's worth just getting a little bit of an understanding of how to be very diplomatic in answers that you give to people whilst you are there. Things like tattoos in China, although not necessarily strictly a taboo, really should be covered up, and things like sort of facial piercings aren't generally common. So in terms of a practical sense, either like removing them before classes or covering them up again is advisable in terms of practical senses. Garrick, what are the dress codes like for schools? That leads quite nicely onto that. So many schools, if you're working in private language centres will have their own uniforms. These are usually branded polos that they have, whilst also wearing smart but comfortable trousers and comfortable shoes. If you're working in a public school, it is generally advised that you wear a smart and formal get-up, usually a shirt, smart trousers, smart shoes, in some cases a tie as well, when you are teaching in a public school. But when you're teaching at a private language centre, that's generally given to you. Nathan, what opportunities are there for us facing a second year in China? Are there paths for advancement? Yep, that's absolutely right, Nathan. Opportunity China, we do offer career progression paths where with the mentors that you will have access to in China, they'll be able to give you advice on potential opportunities that will be open to you both in China and back home. We will keep all those teachers who go out as part of the Teach China graduate program updated with regular job advertisements for teaching roles in China that are at maybe more high-end international schools, senior schools and universities for those who have experience and are able to take on those opportunities as well. We will be keeping you updated with information on that throughout the year that you are there. To ensure that you have a good foothold for upward mobility. That being said, the majority of those who actually go out as part of the Teach China graduate program often spend at least their second and very often their third year in China if they choose to do so at the same school or institution. As one thing that we do look for as part of Teach China graduate program partner vetting is ensuring that schools have some sort of mobility criteria in them and teachers are able to ascend to positions either as sort of senior teachers or recruiters from within the organisations in which they're working. And again, if that kind of progression is important to you within an organisation, do let us know before school matching. So there are some organisations that are particularly good at offering roles such as that outside of it. And Nathan, my partner gave me a watch when I visited her, and now I'm horrified. Don't worry, Nathan. My partner gave me a watch as well. It won't be considered too bad for foreigners. They'll know that we don't have that as a particular thing. It's a very broad and sweeping example, and it does usually apply more to clocks than to watches as well. So don't worry. That's absolutely fine. And Nathan, what would be expected from us from employers beyond teaching English? Again, really good question there, Nathan. It depends on the type of school or institution that you're working at. So for public schools, of course, you will be expected to be planning your lessons outside of your teaching hours. But at public schools, there are quite often a lot of showcases that are done to parents and little side projects that you may be expected to participate in with things like mini school plays or projects like that along the side. You'll find when you go to China there'll be a lot of meetings that you will attend and will go to. To give you a few examples of a recent graduate program participant's duties working in a public school this year, they helped to organise a little showcase where students learnt to sing a song from The Sound of Music. They sung that with them and helped them prepare for it and helped them with the English singing, working alongside Chinese music teachers. They also participated in their school's China 70th PRC 70th anniversary showcase bonanza where they sung alongside all of the teachers. This particular teacher actually volunteered to do a solo singing in Chinese as well. So you can get all kinds of really exciting opportunities to do things with your wider school community if you choose to do so. Within private language centres, again, there's things such as lesson planning, but it can be a little bit easier. With private language centres, with that is often pretty much all the lesson plans are there for you already and it's quite plug and play. With private language centres, the big thing outside of your standard teaching hours will often be demonstration classes where parents will bring their students in and decide whether or not they want their student to enrol in a course at that school. With this, you'll be taught how to do a demonstration lesson, and you'll also very often be encouraged to put your own little bit of flair into it as well. So it's almost a bit of teaching plus sales with that. You will also at private language centres sometimes take part in marketing activities at malls or at sort of open showcase events as well. If you choose to do so, very often it's for more experienced teachers who will tend to do that, but quite often new teachers within their first year will want to do that as well once you're trained up. Matthew, Would working in a public school give more exposure to speaking Chinese language with Chinese colleagues, for example, as opposed to an international school? Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. I would say that, certainly. Working within a public school, you are much more likely to be around many more colleagues who will be speaking Chinese amongst themselves more normally. They will speak English to you, of course, if you want them to, but if you want to practice your Chinese and not fall into a trap of hanging around and just speaking with foreign teachers all the time, then a public school certainly would be the way to go for that. But that's not to say for those of you who don't speak Chinese, it would be a massive problem. As of course they will speak English with you as well at public schools. Nathan, how flexible are our lesson plans? What resources would you have for planning physical and online? Will they be available before departure? Again, so it depends on the school that you're working with. So if you're working in a private language centre, the lesson plans are usually quite fixed. You generally will have sort of almost pre-prepared slideshows and a pre-prepared curriculum that you're expected to teach to. You can add your own little flourishes and your own introductions and ends to each class, but usually the content that you need to cover is generally quite prepared for you and can sometimes be a little rigid, but it is a bit more of a case-by-case basis, and speaking with your individual HR departments is the best way to go for with that. With relation to resources that will be available, again, this depends on the school that you are going to. They will be able to provide you with example lesson plans and things like that before you head out, and with information such as that will be no problem at all. With relation to lesson planning at public schools, that often can be a little more flexible. You'll usually be given a guideline on what to teach according to the curriculum that they're being taught in during their Chinese teacher English classes at the moment. And to do a particular review of that, you'll have a lot of meetings with colleagues on that where you can discuss your ideas and come up with your lesson plans. So there is a lot more flexibility when it comes to public school teaching. Michael, if we work in a public school, will we still get to know other foreign language teachers? Absolutely you will. So the public school organisations that we work with in China all work on behalf of their respective cities' education bureaus, specifically to hire foreign teachers. So as part of that, there's a large community of foreign teachers who all fall under that umbrella, who you will meet upon arrival, who you'll get to know, who you'll be in WeChat groups with, who you'll get to spend time with outside of school, and also who you will get to meet during the pre-departure day with Opportunity China. You can decide if you want to share an apartment. You can decide you can find in which districts, which areas you're going to be working in, if that's going to be relevant for you. Many public schools, quite a large number of public schools, very often have more than one foreign teacher as well who will be working at the school. But if you're working at a public school outside of your school hours, there is a lot of opportunity, and you'll have access immediately to foreign teachers within the community of public schools. Michael, do you work more hours in a public school? No, is the simple answer to that. Many public schools have much more limited and flexible office hours, although they may run for longer, sometimes for as long as 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock. You certainly are not expected to be in school all of that time. You're expected to be in school in order to complete your lessons, teaching your lessons, doing your planning, and attending any meetings that are necessary. Outside of that, they're usually a lot more flexible. Within private language centres, there is generally a minimum number of office hours that you're expected to complete, and you will often be working more hours technically in a private language centre than in a public school. You will certainly, almost certainly, be working more teaching hours in a private language centre than in a public school. Nathan, How does teaching with Chinese students differ from teaching British kids? Engagement, rules, behaviour. Really good question. Again, Chinese students are very often used to receiving a very strict kind of education that's taught in a rote classical style, where they sit in big long rows from front to back, sometimes with between 40 and 60 students in a class, with a teacher who has a clear structure, clear authority, and very little engagement with students on a one-to-one basis. If you're working in a private language centre, this can be so different for you. And this is why sometimes what I say is it can sometimes be harder to teach 4 Chinese students than 40 Chinese students. If you're working in a public school and you've got a clear structure and you're doing a song and then you're going around the class and getting them to work in groups and they're in their home environment, it's a lot easier. If you're in a private language centre and they are outside of their school environment, their learning environment, which is very strict, regimented and taught, it can sometimes be harder to maintain order with 4 students than with 40. Very often what I say is you feel your way into the job a lot. Teachers, the most common problem that I hear from teachers is, oh, I'm rubbish, my kids all keep messing around, I can't keep control of them. The most important thing to take note of, first of all, is have a clear structure for your lessons. Have a thing that you are going to do at the beginning that is going to be repetitive, be it a song, be it a learning exercise or game that you're used to playing, and have something at the end that's going to be fun for them as well. And ensure that throughout the lesson, if they're badly behaved, they won't get the treat at the end, whether it's if you're in a small class size, several like stickers and things like that, if you're in a private language centre, or if you're in a large class size, a song that they like to sing as well. Getting them to speak to one another and interact outside of all repeating and calling back can be difficult, particularly with larger class sizes, and does require a lot of energy. The way I found that this tends to work best is having a clear structure throughout, ensuring that groups know exactly who they're going to be facing and who they're going to be speaking with, and being consistent with your rules as well. The moment you start to change things around in China in terms of rules and things that they're not used to, that's when chaos can break out. So even if you want certain students who are very often used to working together in a group of 4 or 5 to work with different students, I would recommend against it and keeping students in their same groups throughout the year, even if it might seem a bit counterintuitive. And Michael, is the pay better at private language schools or public schools? Base pay usually works out about the same. Pay differences tend to be exemplified by the city in which you're living in as opposed to the type of school you're working at. However, private language centres do tend to offer much better bonus incentives and overtime payments if you work over the required teaching hours per week, and if you achieve sign-ups and things like that, the earning potential at private language centres with bonuses and overtime payment is actually a huge amount better potentially than public schools if you're financially and results and KPI driven. But in terms of a base salary, they work out at around the same. Okay, great. Well, I think that's everything for today. We were originally looking at half an hour, but it's always great when there's lots and lots of questions and we can have an opportunity to discuss and answer this. I would like to just finish by saying that in April, we'd like to give everyone the opportunity to be linked with a teacher in China, and we will send across information to you on that in due course. So you can get a bit of a better idea from teachers who are actually on the ground at the moment for advice from them as well and information on what to expect. And just one more question popped in before. Nathan, why are these jobs so available and accessible for those from English-speaking nations? Is there a lack of native speakers in China? How much English do other teachers typically speak? Great question, Nathan. The simple answer to that is, in China, there are 300 million English language learners, or around 5 times the population of the United Kingdom, or about 1.5 times the population of the United States. So, teaching, learning from a foreign teacher who is a native speaker is seen as the gold standard of education by Chinese at the moment. China is looking to assert itself as being a new global hegemon, as being one of the new great superpowers of the world. And as President Xi Jinping says, English is the bridge to the world as its global language. People in China very often follow the words of their leaders and of the government and of things that are recommended, and it is seen as on an institutional level, so hence the need from foreign teachers in public schools, as well as an individual and private level, hence the need for native speaking teachers in private language institutions, a real desire to have a native speaking foreign teacher teach their children and really sort of boost and level up, to coin a rather unfortunate Boris Johnson phrase, their children in English language learning ability, to be able to be within 50 years in the top 10 of the people those who are learning English as a second language fluency. So that's a very simple answer to that question. But in terms of native speakers, those from the 7 countries that China officially considers to be native speaking on a broad level, there were times in the past where non-native English speakers would go over on lax visas, and people would play fast and loose with visa regulations in China, teachers and schools themselves. The government clamped down very strongly on this some time ago, and you might read stories of people who had issues with that because they went out on tourist visas and things such as that. Opportunity China does now and has always worked only with schools and institutions that provide Z legal working visas. Every single teacher who goes out through Opportunity China go out on a Z legal working visa, and unfortunately for those who are non-natives, a requirement now in order to get a legal Z working visa to teach English in China is that you come from one of those 7 native speaking English countries. So that's about that for that. In terms of how much English do the other teachers typically speak, again, great question. If you're in a public school, the English teachers will all speak good English, and very often a lot of the other teachers will speak relatively good English as well. Many teachers will probably be learning themselves and will probably make very good friends with you and invite you out to lots of dinners in order to help them boost their English by speaking with a native speaker or improve their English in some way or another as well. In private language centres, the majority of staff there will speak English due to the nature of the centre being an English-speaking centre itself. So you can expect to find a lot of help from teachers and HR professionals speaking English to you. That's great. Well, thank you all very much again for your time, and thank you very much for your kind messages. I will, as always, be available for absolutely anyone if anyone has any questions, as will your Opportunity China coordinator who you're speaking with at the moment. My email, if you want to contact me directly, is will@opportunity-china.com. Do feel free to drop me a question if something comes in. I'm just going to quickly pop it in the chat just here. Do feel free to drop me a message if anything does pop up or you need help with anything at all. But thank you very much indeed. It was lovely speaking with you all. And I hope to speak with you all again very soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.